Welcome to the Modern CPA Success Show, the podcast dedicated to helping accounting firms stay ahead of the curve. Our mission is to provide you with the latest and greatest insights on cutting-edge tools, innovative marketing strategies, virtual CFO services, and alternative billing methods. Join us as we change the way people think about accounting.
Adam, we are talking about artificial intelligence today with Kyle Geers. Kind of initial thoughts. What are people going to hear?
It's scary, right? Like AI is
Can
going to
be.
take over. We might as well just kind of figure out our exit strategy now. No, I think AI is going to really help us. I mean, I think what Kyle talks a lot about is just being able to utilize it and leverage it and be on the front end of it. And I think as long as we're doing that and we're constantly exploring the new ideas and the things that it can bring to the table, I think we'll be able to, leverage it to improve our lives and make us more valuable to our clients. So
I think you're totally right. A couple of things I would add to what you had said is he's a practitioner. He's been doing accounting, both big firm and started his own. So he's actually using it. He's not just out kind of a proponent of AI. And the point, I can't remember if it's either you or Kyle made, was AI is already in a lot of the things that we're doing. And so we are experiencing it. So the idea of sort of using it for the way you want it to versus just having apps that have AI in it, I thought was an important piece. So I think people are going to really get a lot out of this episode.
yeah, no, I think so too.
All right, welcome to this episode of the Modern CPA Success Show. I'm Tom Waddleton. I'm co-hosting with Adam Hale. Adam, welcome today.
Hey, Tom.
We are excited to talk to Kyle Geers, and Kyle is CEO and co-founder of Zeroed In Consulting. Kyle, welcome, and as form of intro, you want to just tell us a little bit about kind of your career journey and what got you to today's conversation?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. And Adam, thanks for having me on. Glad to be a part of the show. Just a quick background for myself. Started probably where a lot of CPAs start. I worked at a large global CPA firm of Grant Thornton. So I'm based here in Los Angeles. And so started on the audit side, right, of, working with helping out companies do their financial statement audits, public integrated audits, really spans the range of, industries, going from startups to public companies. It was a good experience to get see a lot of different sides of public accounting and see what works for companies and what doesn't. Right. And so, I've been in the public accounting industry for a while. I've spent probably about 5 or 6 years on the audit side and eventually made the decision to transition over into the consulting side. So, now helping companies get ready for those audits, right? And so, they were starting, the firm was starting a technical accounting advisory group at the time, relatively young. And so I was kind of one of the local leaders out there on the West Coast to, really help build the business and build the group. And so, that was probably about 3 or 4 years there. And, got a lot of experience of, helping go out and win the work, right? Or build the team or do some recruiting. And so came to find that I really enjoy, I'm kind of one of those, I call it nerdy technical accountants that really enjoys the accounting. But, I also really enjoyed the business building side of it. So eventually connected with my partner, my co-founder, who, he was at Grant Thornton as well, and took a different path for a while, but we reconnected. And we said, hey, why don't we do this for ourselves, right? And there's some ideas that we have in our head that we would do differently, than a lot of other public accounting firms out there. So starting in February 2021, we made the choice to start Zeroed In Consulting. And, really what we do, our bread and butter was right out the gate was, what we knew how to do, right? So we do a lot of helping companies with their technical accounting, US GAAP, complex accounting services like that. Where my partner's focus is on the inside, right? So helping out in a controllership capacity, helping with month-end close. So we kind of focused on more of those complex accounting tasks. But one of the things that, right out the gate that we wanted to make sure was embedded in, the culture and everything we do is, incorporating technology, right? There's so much out there on the horizon, having been released in the last few years that, you can use to make your processes way more efficient, way more accurate. And so, maybe like 5 or 10 years ago, that was just the Fortune 500 companies investing billions of dollars into technology. it's not the case anymore, right? There's things that you can do even with a simple Microsoft Office subscription. So that's kind of our goal, is to really work with growing companies,
Hmm.
businesses, and bring that power of the technology to them, to help them. So you don't necessarily need to be a massive company to enjoy a lot of this automation and a lot of these efficiencies.
Yeah,
That's great
Kyle,
background.
you're so 2021, huh? So I feel like sometimes you get an advantage just starting out. One, you're a little bit more nimble, but I kind of, it's like it's almost like software platforms. So you think about like QuickBooks Desktop,
Mhm.
and then moving to just getting used to QuickBooks Online.
Mhm.
You have this like advantage where you can do all these cool things. It's like I remember whenever we started our practice, like nobody was paperless and
Yeah.
nobody was like
Mm.
leveraging some of the like go-to meeting at that time technology. So we were like, oh, we're cutting edge. We can do all this like cool stuff. And it wasn't like we had to rebuild the wheel with 200 team members. So
Mhm.
we could still be nimble and we could still try out every software. I mean, don't get me wrong, like we would exhaust our small team at that point, like because we were constantly switching hands and doing stuff.
Mhm.
But I know that kind of brings us into this topic. It feels like you're like starting out with on the cusp of all this AI stuff. So you really have an
Mhm.
opportunity, like you said, to embed all of that into your baseline offering, and you don't have to like go back and revisit all your processes you've built over the years, all the tools that you've used, and figure out how to integrate it in. You can actually just kind of build it from scratch, with some of these tools. Obviously they'll all super change, like we were joking earlier, but super change in a couple years.
Mhm.
But anyway, I just think it's a cool opportunity, and love to hear, how you're leveraging AI and how the rest of us can start to kind of think about that stuff, both internally for our practice and then also for our clients as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made a good point, right? We got pretty lucky, I think, of, being at this point in time where, it did become widely available, right? And so, being one of the folks out there that was, said that, hey, there's a wave coming, right? Like we can still be on
Mhm.
top of that wave, and let's see if we can make that happen. And like you said, it's a lot easier to build from scratch than, refine existing processes. Not that it's impossible, but it's definitely helped us so far.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, where do you think the biggest opportunities are? If someone's looking at AI and accounting, especially the kind of practice that you're doing, where are the biggest opportunities for gains there?
Yeah, so there's a few that come to mind right out the gate, right? And I think for a lot of firms, a lot of companies run on pretty the same softwares, right? So we're thinking
Hmm.
about QuickBooks Online.
Yep.
If you're taking the next step up, you're going to a NetSuite or a Sage Intacct or other software providers like that, right? And so it's really cool to start seeing the features that are getting released for a lot of these providers. For instance, things like QuickBooks, right? Their big push over the next year or two is to introduce QuickBooks AI, right? And they've already started
Hmm.
trying to do that with some insights, on the software as it stands. So it's I'm really interested to see, because we're getting to this point where you can bring in something like an invoice, an AP invoice, and that can go into an inbox and that can get recognized and recorded, right? They've already started putting rules in there that'll just automatically categorize a transaction.
Hmm.
um, you know it's still up and coming, right? You still definitely need to be looking at transactions like that, but as it gets refined, as it learns, I could see that really changing things for a lot of accounting firms out there, where
Yep.
all of a sudden you're not spending 10 to 20 hours sorting transactions, making sure you get it right. You're more of doing some review, but then you're kind of able to review and analyze. What does this mean, right? Doing more of that
Hmm.
strategic side of things.
Yes, around like data entry, bookkeeping. And we've seen some of those things like Bill.com and Expensify and Divvy all have some of those kind of things. And you're right, it is really good how well it can go through. It's not perfect, but it takes a really good first step to try to apply some of those rules
Hmm.
into
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
The poor accounting industry, they finally get caught up with something and then we just take it away. Like I feel like CAS 1.0, everybody just finally started like going, oh, accounting firms should be in charge of all the accounting integrity and
Yeah.
outsourcing your finance department. And it's like, oh, but not this part anymore. Ta-da! Here in a year or two, QuickBooks will do it automatically, and so will every other software. So time to move upstream to advisory. So the learning curve's pretty steep there, but there's some really cool tools, like you said, for that as well.
Elevate your firm with a virtual CFO playbook, how to land $60,000 per year clients and provide a killer client experience. This comprehensive online series of modules provides you with the essential tools to create and deliver scalable VCFO services. Developed from Summit's successful approach, which propelled them from $500,000 to over $10 million in revenue in 10 years, this playbook will equip you with the skills to take your firm to the next level. Additionally, upon completion, you can receive 24 hours of CPE credit for the course. Ready to grow your firm? Enroll now at vcfoplaybook.summitcpa.net.
So what are some of the things that you are deploying right now, just or even in early infancy? What are some of the things that you're doing right now?
Yeah, so on our end, we're doing a lot of the more technical work, right? And so trying to figure out how do you incorporate AI into some of your more complex areas, right? And it brings me back to a conversation that we had at my old group, right? It was an all hands call, and it was someone asked, right? So is technology going to replace accountants, right? The age old question that we've been asking for a while. And he said I could see it happening for some of the simpler accounting tasks, for even audit, things like that. And he said, but it won't happen to us. We're too complex. We're too technical. We're too subjective, right? And it was like, even at that time, and this was probably back in 2019 or so, maybe 2018. That just immediately kind of, sent up a red flag in my head of, okay, there's a lot of people like this that are thinking the same way, right? Like, I'm protected, I'm too technical, I'm too subjective, it's not going to happen. And then, fast forward to now, we have these crazy, AI chatbot capabilities, things like Chat GPT, that if you know how to use it, if you have the right use cases, you can use it in that capacity. So, to your point, Adam, of how are we trying to use it? There's a lot of information out there, especially on the technical side. You got to do a lot of research on, thousands of pages, guides. How does this apply to me? It's a really good data gathering resource to say, hey, I have a question. Can you bring back some results? Can you bring me back a summary of how the accounting would go for this, right? How would you account for a lease? How you would account for, new debt or something like that? I think that that's going to be a huge time saver. We've already started using it ourselves, of gathering that research, and just having a good starting point versus, having to go through hours of research of finding where and what you need to look at.
I'd love to dig into that a little bit. To what extent do you trust those resources, and what are the main ones that you would go after if you're saying start your research using an AI engine?
Yeah, it's gotten a lot better than it was, a year ago, right? Like, if you just kind of popped a really complex accounting question into, the first iteration of ChatGPT, well, that's not going to be great, right? And there's still, and it's a good point to mention of, like, there's still a lot of risks. There's still a lot of attention that you need to be, taking with the results that come back, right? There's a lot of hallucination still happening within these, these chatbots. So finding, it's validate, right? It's making sure that what I see here, maybe it can point me to the resource that it came from, right? Did it come straight from the accounting codification, and if so, then great. That's a great source. Did it come from a firm guide, right? Maybe something from KPMG that says, this is how we would think about treating this. That's awesome. If you can point and go and validate where that is coming from, then, that's ideal. If it's coming from, a lot of different sources, it might not even be right. And so you need to be double checking and making sure that that is the case, especially with these more technical areas. But even to that point of getting to that starting of, okay, here's the information that's provided to me, going and trying to find it or validate it, that's a lot quicker than going leafing through all the research guides and getting your own answer initially.
Yeah, I can especially see people at maybe smaller firms where there's not a where there's not the guru sitting somewhere in the ivory tower. You're like, hey, go to them. They have the answer. To be able to
Yeah.
get that kind of start is huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Adam mentioned, sorry, go ahead. Finish what you're
And
saying.
the last thing I'll say is, just with the volume of, with a wide range of, very general information over the past year or so, it's going to be less effective, right? But as you
Mhm.
are able to refine it into very more like specialized data, right? So if I'm just looking at the accounting guidance, if I'm just looking at these guides, you're going to get a lot higher quality information. And so, I don't
Mhm.
know if you both saw the recent notification from OpenAI saying, hey, you can create your own custom GPTs now. And, so basically a firm could take their own instance. They could say, hey, here are the
Mhm.
files that I want to put into this, or, here are the websites that I want to incorporate into this. And now you're filtering out a lot of that kind of lower quality information out there, and you're able to
Interesting.
really refine that a little bit. And so that's where I'm getting excited of, seeing if can you do that? Can you, make sure that you're allowed to, incorporate the files that you are getting in there. But that's going to give you a lot higher quality results when you're asking a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of where our head's been. I know our IT team's been thinking through how to leverage AI. And Tom, well, I'll have you probably talk more about the one that Jake and Jamie came up with in terms of
Uh-huh.
like the coding stuff. But the one that's top of mind for us right now is actually internal. And to your point, it's less about research. We definitely don't want to be, I don't know, maybe it's a wise tale now, that law firm that like where they made up all those court cases or
Yes.
whatever and made it
Yeah.
sound very professional and they use it or whatever. But we definitely don't want to be them. And so, yes, validate sources, do all that kind of stuff. And don't get me wrong, I think that a lot of people on our team are starting to use ChatGTP for that first line of defense or how to write stuff or how to proof read their stuff. But what we're thinking about AI for is more of like an internal wiki. So we have a lot of really good internal conversations about topics.
Mhm.
We bring in a lot of subject matter experts that are good at different things. And then we also have client conversations about some of those topics, like when we're explaining what a phantom plan is or, doing some of these other advisory related topics. So we're looking at, is there a way to use a, kind of a note-taking software, similar to built into Zoom, but there's like 20 or 30 of them out there. I think we've kind of landed on the one that we're going to ultimately end up using, but be able to bring all that information in, let it automatically tag the conversation so Tom can use it as a follow-up for his
Mhm.
next meeting with that client so he remembers, hey, what were the takeaways, or
Mhm.
it automatically puts those to-dos inside of our ClickUp, so it automatically is in our to-do list. And then ultimately it's a search function. So it's like, hey, talk about phantom plans. And then you type in phantom plans and it pulls up like the last 5 conversations that have been about phantom plans. And then you can kind of scan that, figure out what it is. And so it's this like interactive wiki that that's like our main focus right now. I think before the end of the year is to really kind of lock that down and build that part out. That's how we're leveraging AI now. But
Yeah.
um,
And just to add to, I mean, what that could replace, Adam, which I think is huge, is what our team does is often it's Teams messages like, hey, does anyone have experience with phantom plans?
Mhm.
But when people are dealing with so many emails and Teams messages, those often get ignored. And that's not the best solution to do that. So if you did have a place where you're like, oh, I found all these conversations, and in that you could say, oh, and Adam was in 3 of them. So if I feel like I need more, then I just go to Adam and say, hey, heard you talk about phantom plans with these 3 clients. Let's chat about my situation. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
going to be huge.
Yeah, I love that use case. And it's funny, earlier in the year I said, okay, how do we make that happen, right? How do we get this
Hmm.
internal wiki, to pull all of this information? And the immediate, 6 months ago answer was, okay, well, we probably need to hire a developer to, put something
Yep.
like that together. Nope, not anymore. It's,
right,
Yes.
it's
right.
here, and that's kind of scary of how quickly that's come in to to give us those capabilities at a really reasonable price. And so I love that idea of having it as an internal wiki, even helping it feed into some of the deliverables you put out, right? Like can it eventually create a memo? Can it create a an
Yeah.
initial reconciliation? And you'll have to refine it as you go, but yeah, I see a lot of power in taking the information that's coming in from your calls, right? your documentation and summarizing it and putting it into a great starting point.
Yeah, there's a lot of learned information. The other big one, Tom, if you want to talk into it, was like the code that they wrote to drop into ChatGTP for coding, right? You remember that? Like on our last team retreat, they wrote like a big paragraph that you could take a client's entire financial statement, all their detail, like you take their GL, throw it in there, and it would return back like what accounts you should be coding everything to. And you type in, like, you just say, hey, this is client XYZ, and they're in Dallas, Texas, and you drop in all the vendor names, and it says these are the accounts where everything should be coded, and then give you the confidence level. This is a 95% confidence level, 50% confidence level, let you know where all the codification should be for all your client data, which is pretty cool.
Yep, that was huge. Yes, I had forgotten that example. The other one that we had talked about was after stripping out any confidential information, could you feed in financial statements? And maybe, I mean, one of my examples is, so across the columns is all the different time periods, and put that in. And I think you could both get back potentially accounting corrections, like, oh, I see a big drop in accounting spend that may have you say, do I need to do an accrual or something like that? But then the other side, what insights are you seeing? Might it come back and say, I see this trend going up that maybe it either takes us a lot of time to find, or we just don't even see that, but it's going through thousands of lines of data, pulling out stuff that we end up saying, okay, that really saves us time or gives us insights into that. Anything you're doing along that? I love that, the thought of insights, kind of move from accounting transactions up to how do you get smarter doing it? Any other examples you think of, Kyle, in that area?
It's funny that you mentioned it, because I was about to say the same thing of, where with those insights, right? All of a sudden, a lot of people have been wondering, okay, how do I get into the CAS side of things, right? How do I become more of an advisor and less of an accountant? Insights like that, if it's spitting out places for you to look into, that's such a great way for you just to immediately provide value, to any of your clients, right? And all of a sudden it's, hey, maybe we should look at this. Maybe I spend an hour or two to kind of dig into the details and say, okay, well, why is it lower, right? And maybe I can, give you a recommendation, give a business owner a recommendation this month of, we should do this or that. And I think those are the things that right now, as everybody's looking for things like, accounting advisors, right? Fractional CFOs, things like that. That's where all of a sudden, a lot of us that have a lot of accounting and finance expertise, but not really sure how to use it in that, advice capacity, it just aids that so much. So, like you said, we're starting to get into some more of these engagements where, where we basically have the setup of how to put together your monthly financial statements, your reporting package. Takes 15 minutes to put that together once it's set up, right? And then you can spend the rest of your, retainer or, the hours that you spend digging into those insights, right? And again, if to your point of, if it's spitting out specific areas that you want to look into, that saves you even more time to focus on providing value to your clients, right? And so, I think it's that way that you could really, a lot of firms could use that and automate that process. And all of a sudden you've got a pretty sustainable, process for, even really high expertise areas like fractional CFO.
Yeah. What about, we'll probably come back to some opportunities, but should we talk just a little bit about some of the risks of doing it? And you've already mentioned one. I had kind of over reliance on technology. And when you talked about researching standards, you talked about citing your sources. So that could be one. But what other risks, if someone's diving in, would you say maybe put the brakes on a little bit, or at least be really conscious of a certain area?
Yeah. So beyond, validating the information you're getting, I'd say the other big one that maybe not a lot of people think of immediately is what you're feeding into the system. And you made a good point of this earlier, Tom, of, once you strip out, the confidential information, then you can feed it in. I think there's a lot of, people out there that don't think about taking that step and, just may not be aware that you need to be taking that step. And that gets you in a lot of trouble if you're feeding confidential information into a large model like that, right? I mean, I think we've already heard about a few large companies where, people were doing that, right? And now there's lawsuits, coming out of it. And so especially as, an accountant, a CPA, you have that really high level of confidentiality to your clients. That's critical to be able to find a way to make sure that, you're not dropping sensitive information, into these models, right? Because it's going to get used and it's going to get, shared with other areas. And so that would be another probably key risk in my mind of whatever information you have, if it's, a lease agreement, if it's the financial statements, right? It's figuring out a good tool or a good way to strip out, any of those names or information that shouldn't be going in there.
Yeah, and I'll share a mistake I made early on. And so personally, I work with a not for profit, and they came to me, and the IRS had given them a penalty, and so I used ChatGPT to write a abatement letter for them. It did a phenomenal job, but in there I actually said, here's the organization, here's the time period, things like that. And then it was a little later to think about, like, you know what I need to do, and I've done in the past, is it's an anonymous company that you feed in, and then you change it in the final draft.
Mm-hmm.
But it was amazing how it wrote the whole thing. But then there was sort of this aha after, like, okay, I just fed in the name and like what they did, so now that's gone into the internet, and you could see easily making other mistakes like that where it's a lot more sensitive stuff, and you're putting in stuff that it can use in the future
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
that. So I think that kind of cleanup and what you're sharing ends up being a pretty important thing to be aware of, what you're feeding in.
Yeah. And I think there are things coming into place that are going to help solve that problem too, right? I think, with these things like custom GPTs, like you can have a dedicated instance, right? Have those walls
Yeah.
up for your business, your organization, where, you can utilize, maybe client names and, it's not going out to the greater good. That's definitely
Yes.
something that you should be checking with, your IP or your security, legal counsel, to make
Sure.
sure that you're not crossing any lines that shouldn't be crossed. But it's nice to see that they're starting to see where those risks are, and they're trying to address them, through future products,
Yeah.
models.
Yeah. And Adam mentioned one of the prevention ones when he talked about what we had done, the sort of confidence level that was in there, Adam, when you talked about the vendors, because it would be easy to say, oh, great, ChatGPT or whatever gave me all the coding within 3 seconds and just immediately apply all of it. And if you're not scanning through this confidential, you could probably make some really silly mistakes that you could catch by making sure you're doing some good review.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe thinking of sort of going through and saying, because it is just a machine doing it, and the same with like it doing its own coding and stuff like that, being careful that it didn't just pick up like a statement instead of a bill and go ahead and enter it as a due bill and things like that. So that's probably one of the risks that you could run into, is it can do something that used to take you an hour in like 2 minutes. But do you add some time to make sure there's a thorough review so you get better quality, and not just say, great, I'll just pile tons more work on myself and everything runs faster, and suddenly I realize I've gotten out of control
Yeah.
in doing
Yeah.
it.
I would say make sure not to, review controls. Review is not going away as a process of this, right? Like
Yes.
ultimately we're getting to a more accurate place, but you should be treating it as you would for, if a staff accountant is putting together, a reconciliation, doing that categorization, you should be doing that same level of review and, looking into things as you were before. The hope is that, the errors will begin decreasing, as the model gets better and better. But yeah, just to kind of say, hey, because this is a machine, provided by a machine, that's a dangerous road, just to not do any type of review. So that's a really
Yeah.
good point, Tom.
I wonder about, you may not have a solution to this, but I think a challenge we have in the accounting industry, if you talk to people who are 20, 30-year people and they start out as auditors, often they'll describe the reason they know certain things so well is because even by hand or manual Excel, they had to repetitively do something that sort of drilled it into their mind. Now we've got people coming out that probably don't even have to do that. That's all being done by AI. And I wonder, do we run the risk of people not really understanding the basis? Because there was some value in doing some of those reconciliations to the point where you're like, I know this stuff in my sleep because it was
Yeah.
so rote. Do you have any solution in your firm as you're like, okay, AI is doing the low level stuff, so you got to jump in knowing how to review?
Yeah, I'm thinking back to, when I was an auditor, and, it seemed like where I learned most was when you were a senior, right? And all of a
Oh,
sudden, you're not putting together, you're not the preparer of the workbook or the work paper or the
okay.
reconciliation, right? But you need to know it well enough to understand where there's issues, right? Okay, this looks strange. And you have the bigger picture at the same time to say, okay, this is wrong and this is why. I think it's going to be important to keep that to I think that training is going to happen at the first level of review, right? So, if you're an entry level accountant is no longer doing, the preparation, right? If that's, or the categorization, if that's happening from, artificial intelligence, then their job role is probably going to be more of that first line of review, right? Almost similar
Mm-hmm.
to if you're uh, right now, right? I think a lot of firms are, offshoring some of the lower level work to, internationally.
Sure.
But it is critical, when it comes back, to be looking through what happened, and understanding like, hey, this is, we need to refine it this way. We need to look into this. We need to resolve that. I see there being a really good analogy between, how that's happening in offshoring right now versus,
Mm-hmm.
AI. I could see it being the exact same. So I would say it's making sure that review and that training of that review is happening right then, because I think you get a lot of information on, why we're doing it as well as how it's being done at that level.
Yeah,
So that would be my thought, right out of the gate.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Adam, I've heard you describe more on the offshore processes of you're going to give, say, me a task, and here's what I want you to do, but then here's how I'm going to check that that work is done. And in some cases, you're even having me enter the information, like go out and type in what the balance sheet says, and that number should match what the bottom of your spreadsheet says, and it'll show error. But you explain to me, this is where I'm looking so that when I get it and it doesn't have zero in there, I'm actually trying to fix it before I hand it to you because I've already shown myself that it's wrong. I could see the same kind of thing with AI. If I'm going to feed it in, but here are the things I need to do after. So you're sort of building those controls in before you just jump in and try to do that.
Yeah, it'd be great to be able to, basically format or program in all your control totals and just be able to feed it straight through and have it come out and validate the work for you on the outset, so that you know where to point to.
Yeah, it's something a lot better than just here's your answer, and then you're like, okay, some black box, and I trust it implicitly because it just seems so darn smart.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I really like, back when you were auditing and, we would review controls, right? Both of, how it's getting set up, and you always had to ask, okay, what are the things that you're looking for in this work paper? And I think incorporating that more, not that everybody has to have SOX going on, for their review process, but, like you said, pointing out those key areas, control totals, like if it's a specific area, right? Oh, here's the risk, are you not supposed to add that? Are you not supposed to capitalize this, right? Making that more specific. And I think you set that up, and as you refine it, that's not a huge task, after the initial setup.
Yeah. I would guess lots of practitioners who are listening may hear a lot about AI, and everyone's sitting saying, like, what would be a good first step, or what should I be doing? Maybe I believe it or maybe I don't, but I'm hearing enough about it. Any suggestions that you would have? And I guess I think of maybe some smaller firms who are like, we don't have a great tech department to suddenly help us do a huge initiative. What would you say are some good sort of initial use cases to help people step into this?
You mean like trainings or
Training or first places to start? And I think of things like, well, there are note takers like Adam mentioned, or you can go into Chat GPT and just start writing memos or things to say, just touch the thing and see what it feels like. I'd just be curious kind of what you would say if someone says, hear a lot about it and have no idea what to do.
Yeah. One place that we've started is, when we, with firms is, anytime, one of your teammates reaches out with a question, right? Of, okay, how do I account for this? What do I put this to? Like what we say is, okay, first put it into Chat GPT and see what it comes back with. And, tell me what it comes back with, so we make sure that it's the right answer. But I think it starts getting that process going of, hey, if I have a question, I'll enter it in. Let's see how accurate it is. And when it comes back, you can see, okay, well, is that feeding the right information? Am I getting confidence with the answers that are coming back, from AI? So I would encourage, to build that into kind of your staff's, question process, right? Come back with a proposed solution. And, that's what we're all looking for, when we are reviewing and training our team members anyway. So, have them start using Chat GPT. Again, make sure there's no confidential information going into that. But, and then you as a firm owner say, okay, yeah, this is helpful, right? I'm getting, fewer than 10 or 20 questions a day that I have to answer. And I think that's some low hanging fruit to save you time right out the gate.
Okay. I really like that. I hadn't thought about that one. Sounds a little bit like when a firm has the internal accounting expert, like, hey, did you ask Kyle and did you run this past him? You're going to do the same with ChatGPT. Before I trust your answer, what did ChatGPT say about this?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think about, do you have experience with meeting note takers? We've talked about that one just a little bit. Have you done much with that?
I haven't. I've seen a few, note takers that have been pretty good. I know there's one of our partners, diligence partners. They use Otter AI,
Uh-huh.
Yep.
which kind of does those transcripts. I
Yep.
know that Microsoft is starting to roll out more of its Copilot programs, that focus on AI. And my understanding from that is even, like you said, it's taking the information. It's not just you know, giving you a transcript of the entire call, but like you
Right.
said, you can ask it questions and it can filter and it can, bring answers just based on what's in that call. So, I think a lot of whatever systems we use on a daily basis, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's Google, they're starting to build a lot of those tools in there. But no, I
Mhm.
think there's some really good providers, things like Otter AI, that have been doing it for a while and they've gotten pretty refined at that. I don't know if you both have
Yeah.
other ones that you'd recommend.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the teams went through about 15 of them, but I know the big one in the space right now is Fireflies.
Mhm.
That's the one that everybody seems to you hear the most about, and
Right.
then Grain is another big one, and the one that we're ultimately landing on, like, is escaping me at the moment.
Avoma?
Avoma. There you
Yeah.
go. Yep, there it is. So Tom knows. So we haven't officially rolled it out yet, but there's just different aspects of it and controls that we feel like that one's ultimately the one that we're going to land with right now.
Yeah.
So
And just the number of them. So, Kyle, we are a remote firm where all of my client meetings are online. The number of people that are attaching those AI tools has just exploded in about the last 6 months. It's just been amazing to me, including Adam. I do a lot of coaching of firms, and we have an every Tuesday fireside chat with people who have taken our virtual CFO course. There are 3 or 4 people who haven't been showing up to the meetings for months, but they send their AI to take notes. And so over and over, like, these people want to be admitted. Now we're up to like 2 or 3 every single week that they're just showing those things. But I'm most excited because I take a lot of notes during meetings. But I realize when I'm facilitating a meeting and trying to take notes, and then also usually I'm sharing my screen, I'm a terrible note taker.
Mm-hmm.
So I type the whole meeting and then I go back the next week and I almost always have like a sentence in like the most important part, like they made the decision to, and then the sentence stops. And the idea of having AI where I don't have to spend so much trying to type and think and talk at the same time is just great to say, okay, can it summarize what happened? And maybe even come back and say, here's what you promised to do. And then as Adam said, you can search across things too.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's going to be huge for us.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier that if you miss a call, right? Like you can go back and you can dissect, you have to listen to the entire 30 minutes to understand everything that was discussed. You can
Yeah.
really get those key takeaways. I see that being huge especially for internal calls, right? So, maybe I
agree.
don't need to be on every single call, but if I say, okay, that was an important call, I need to know what came from it. That saves you a ton of time to be able to focus, maybe even like have some focus time on a really important task. And, later on you can kind of dissect, what happens from some of these calls. I don't think it should be what you solely rely on, but I think if you're
Yep.
cutting it down, I think that's a really good way to be more efficient with your time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One thing in Fireflies that Jamie is doing, and I hope Avoma can have this. So Jamie's our advisory director. If there was a point of an internal meeting he thought was really valuable, he would do just a video cut. And so he might say, hey, we had a great conversation about building your 2024 plans if something, and watch this 2 minutes. Well, the chance of me watching a 2 minute video is pretty high, but the chance of me going back to watch the 1 hour video,
Yeah.
I've got great intentions, but I don't do it. So I
Yeah.
completely
Agreed.
take your point that you could cut those things. And then if you could search and find it yourself, but someone who says, hey, this was really valuable could be cool. It may also mean that 2 internal team people don't have to go to every client call where you could say, hey, this was the part that you really need to know because that topic did come up, but you
Mhm.
didn't have to sit for an hour in the meeting just to make sure you were there for that one
Mhm.
particular part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure clients will be happy, especially if anybody's, getting billed on an hourly basis, right? That,
Yes.
they're not paying for 2 people on the call versus one.
Yeah. As we're winding toward the end, I'd love your reaction to this, and maybe you can put a time frame on this. I was at an AI CPA meeting where the quote they said was that they don't think AI is going to be replacing accountants, except for accountants that completely ignore AI. And so I'd be interested kind of what your thought about that is, but maybe if you go out like a year or two, how how big of an impact do you think we will see in that kind of time frame for what's going to happen?
Yeah, yeah. I always go back to kind of the wave analogy, right? Of the, there's two types of people, right? There's those that are, going to be really, I want to say shouting against the wind, right? That say,
Mhm.
hey, this is awful. We shouldn't be using it. I'm not going to use it.
Yep.
And there's those that are going to lean into it and say, hey, I understand what's happening. I'm going to try to use this for my benefit, right? And so, but that wave's coming. I think we can all,
Mhm.
see just with how quickly things have been rolling forward, even with people that
Yes.
say, hey, let's take a pause. That hasn't happened. Right. So,
Right.
it's happening, it's coming quickly. And so, if you are, I would say for anybody that's listening to this, right, it's if you are, you know, I'm seeing less of, the benefit of sitting there and kind of shouting against, artificial intelligence. It's happening. The ones that
Mhm.
really say, okay, it's here, and it's staying. How do I lean into this? How do I just use it for one simple task and start building on top of that? I don't necessarily think that AI is going to replace the accountants, within the next year or two, but
Right.
the accountants that use AI are going to really succeed, I would say, versus others that kind of stick with the status quo. And because the amount of time that it's going to take to complete a task is going to go down considerably for a lot of these
Mhm.
things, versus firms that are kind of sticking with the status quo of, hey, let's get someone to spend 8 hours on this. And I don't think that that's a very sustainable business model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we go out a year or so. We had a conversation in May. We were in Arizona for our team retreat, and ChatGPT was a big topic. And I think what people were talking about is if we went back, I think we thought only 4 or 5 months. Many of us had not even heard ChatGPT at the time. Very little on artificial, and all of a sudden, in a few months, it was just everywhere. It seemed like, and I think that might be what we find a year from now is more the proliferation of things. As I mentioned, more people coming into meetings where maybe that just becomes the total standard or something where I think my encouragement people would be dip your toe into start using things like chat GPT. And so just to start getting some experience, because I think if you're behind the curve and then begin, it's just going to keep going faster and faster where it's going to be pretty difficult to catch up
Yeah,
to
yeah.
things.
One forecaster thing that I'm curious to see, in the coming years is, they're talking more about, okay, well, what's the next step here, right? And it's
Hmm.
probably, an artificial intelligence, app talking to another one, right, for certain
Oh, uh-huh.
situations. And that's a whole topic in itself. I won't go too deep down there,
Sure.
but one thing that I'm interested to see is how audit firms start to use this and
Hmm.
interact with some of these firms that are doing the preparation, right, or doing the consulting work and putting together things like reconciliations, work papers, right? Is
Yep.
there a way that you can start, building, softwares or functionalities where they can communicate, they can be doing a lot of that. Okay, I'm checking the reconciliation and I'm spitting out the results to an auditor, and so they can go down and say, okay, well, here are the focus areas that I want to look at. I don't need to put together the work paper myself. If you're able to incorporate some automation into that as an audit firm, right, of seeing and just seeing if it reduces just the overall back and forth when it's creating some type of work paper or otherwise.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I don't know how quickly that will come or who's going to put that together, but it's one thing that I could see that being an opportunity for someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the one thing that I think, I mean, my takeaway would just be that even for the people that are out there going, hey, I don't really use AI. I mean, I think that in its purest form right now, I think a lot of people just do, and they just don't realize it because
Mm.
it's built into a lot of the apps and the things that we're currently using right now.
Mhm.
We didn't talk about anything revolutionary today that like is going to replace us. There's no robot that all of a sudden knows how to do all the accounting. I mean, don't get me wrong, it could change, a couple of years from now, but nothing's really happening now. I guess my advice to people would be, I think the good news is what ChatGPT did was open up the door for all these other platforms and softwares to have this code to be able to build off of it. And even you don't have to be the most tech savvy in the world to know how to talk into something or get something to do something. Right. You know what I mean? You're not having to be the person in there writing code, I think, and I think that the people that are doing that, great, knock yourself out. You're going to be doing a lot of stuff in ChatGPT, have fun with that. But I think that there's a lot of really smart people out there building software that are going to be able to do a lot of really cool things for us. And you're not really going to have to be that coder. So my advice would just be to, have your ear to the ground whenever it comes to exploring new software. Make sure that you're, doing things like the DCPA, where they talk a lot about this technology. Find some forums, because I think it's less scary than what people think. I think that it's, right now people just feel like, ChatGPT, it's like, how do I code this or figure this out? And like I said, Fireflies is pure AI, you know what I mean? And you don't have to do anything. You just log in, record a meeting, and it does it for you. So that'd be my only advice, is just keep thinking about the technology and just make sure that you're staying focused on that. Because that's, don't worry, there's going to be people that are going to build stuff for you. You don't necessarily have to build it yourself.
Yeah. So here's my final question, and Kyle, I'll start with you and then Adam and me. So an example you think is kind of fun from a personal standpoint from using something like ChatGPT or similar. Anything you want to tell people, like, hey, I do it this way, or I've heard of someone who did this and thought it was sort of a clever use of.
Yeah. And I don't know, I feel like a lot of us may have used it this way so far, but we're going to Costa Rica in 2024, right? So my wife and I want to take a trip out there, and we don't know anything about Costa Rica, right? And so we said, all right, what are the options, right? You can go to a travel agent and say, hey, what, can you help me book this? You can do a lot of research on your own and try to figure out, what it looks like. But my wife dropped that into ChatGPT and said, hey, we want to go to Costa Rica for 7 days, like, give us an itinerary. We don't want to go to museums, right? Like you can add in those prompts, and it, what it spit out was so helpful, so informative, that it basically, like, ChatGPT is my new travel agent. So
I love that idea. That's excellent. That's really cool.
That is really cool, because I get really tired of reading all the posts and then trying to figure out, like, if it's just the, so no, that would be really, that'd be really super cool. That is a good idea. I actually stole one from somebody that I heard for meal prep planning and stuff. They can, like, type in, like, do all your ingredients in your cabinet and figure out what to make and give you different recipes to do and, like, build out a meal plan. Like, you can go in there and you can type in, like, what I like to eat, what I don't like to eat, and it'll build out your whole meal plan and help you even put together your store list and everything. So tried that out, and that's pretty cool.
That's really good. The one, and Adam's heard this one before, but the using it for gift ideas. Can you give me 5 gift ideas? And my daughter used this for a friend, and it was a friend of hers who lived in Cincinnati and was a Bengals fan and was turning 30, and 1 or 2 other things. And one of the suggestions was, why don't you give her a personalized Bengals jersey with her name on the back and the number 30, since that's her age. But she was using that, and it gave her like 10 ideas. And she just said, it made me so much more creative to go through and just see these things, and thought, I wouldn't think about that. And then she said also sort of tested, like, what are the different things about this person, and the better you can be, the better ideas that come out. So kind of fun things. Once you start using it, it's really fun to just keep putting in more and more things and just see what you can get out of it.
Yeah, those are some awesome ideas. I'm going to use both of those that you guys recommended for sure.
Good. Well, Kyle, this has been great. Thank you. I think hopefully informative for a lot of people. I know it was for me, and really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Enjoy this podcast? Visit our website, summitcpa.net, to get more tips and strategy for achieving modern CPA firm success. We're here to be a resource in this ever-changing industry.